Jasmine Crockett stood in the center of the Supreme Court chamber, the marble floor reflecting the gleam of the overhead lights that poured down like judgment from the heavens. Her red suit glowed under the solemn chandeliers, a sharp contrast to the sea of black robes and dark suits surrounding her. She could feel the air itself tremble with tension as Chief Justice John Roberts leaned forward, his expression carved in authority, his voice cutting through the silence. "Congresswoman." "That's enough." The words struck the room like a gavel, echoing across the grand hall, where generations of lawyers had whispered their arguments in reverence. Every spectator froze. Reporters stopped typing. Law clerks turned their eyes toward her. But Crockett did not move. Her fingers tightened around the notes in her hand, her heart thudding hard enough to be heard in her own ears, yet her face remained composed, her gaze unwavering. In that instant, she understood that the next sentence from her mouth could define her career and possibly alter how America thought about power. "With all due respect, Mr. Chief Justice," she said evenly, "the Constitution does not permit you to silence an elected representative discussing matters of voting rights." The sentence rolled through the chamber like a thunderclap. Roberts blinked once, taken aback, and the spectators felt the shift. The balance of power, for one rare heartbeat, had moved from the bench to the podium. What had begun as a procedural hearing in Williams versus Texas election commission was now a constitutional showdown playing out before cameras and history. The courtroom's cameras panned across faces. Justice Kagan, leaning slightly forward, Justice Jackson folding her hands thoughtfully, Justice Thomas still as stone. Crockett took a measured breath and began her argument again, each word deliberate, her voice resonant but never raised. She spoke of Texas voters who stood in line for hours, only to be told their identification no longer qualified, of elderly men and women turned away after voting faithfully for half a century. "This case," she declared, "is not about technicalities. It's about whether we still believe every citizen's vote carries the same weight." Roberts's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, perhaps realizing that any interruption now would only amplify her defiance. She referenced Shelby County versus Holder, reminding the court how the dismantling of key provisions of the Voting Rights Act had been justified as progress. "Yet here we are 10 years later," she said, "seeing the very discrimination that act was written to prevent." A ripple of whispers filled the spectator gallery. Roberts cleared his throat and told her to confine herself to the legal questions. She nodded respectfully but continued anyway. "The legal question, Your Honor, cannot be separated from the people it affects." Her words were calm, but they landed like blows. Then came the stories. She read from affidavits that trembled slightly in her hands. Mary Wilson, age 84, born at home in East Texas in 1939, never issued a birth certificate because of Jim Crow segregation, turned away in 2022 because her baptismal certificate carried a different middle initial than her Social Security card. The gallery gasped softly. Then James Fuentes, a disabled veteran forced to travel 50 miles to a DMV without wheelchair access. "When our veterans cannot vote," she said quietly, "our democracy is wounded." Roberts interrupted again. "Congresswoman, individual anecdotes, while compelling, do not establish constitutional violation." The dismissal was cold, technical, and it was the opening she had been waiting for. Crockett raised her eyes, voice steady as stone. "Mr. Chief Justice, the Constitution was not written for abstract theories. It was written for Mary Wilson and James Fuentes." The audience erupted in low murmurs. Justice Jackson whispered to Sotomayor. Even Barrett, often cautious, looked unsettled. Roberts rapped his gavel, warning her about decorum, but Crockett's composure held firm. "Appropriate decorum," she replied, "requires us to face uncomfortable truths." Her tone carried no anger, only clarity. Then she did something few had dared. She reached into her folder and drew out a small, worn copy of the United States Constitution. Holding it aloft, she said softly, "Before you end my time, Mr. Chief Justice, let's remember this document predates both your authority and mine." The entire room went still. Even the camera operators seemed to stop breathing. "Article Y establishes Congress as a co-equal branch," she continued. "When I speak here, I represent 750,000 Americans whose voices are tied to the issue before this court. Roberts bristled. Your position grants you no special privilege in this courtroom. She met his eyes. It grants me a duty. That single word echoed like a drum. She turned toward the gallery, voice rising just slightly. The founders created 3 co-equal branches to prevent one from silencing another. Today, in this chamber, that principle is being tested. Justice Kagan arched an eyebrow. Justice Sotomayor leaned forward. Roberts tried again. Address the legal question, Congresswoman. Crockett opened the Constitution to a marked page. Article 1, Section 2. Members of Congress represent the people. The 15th Amendment forbids denying the vote because of race. When you threaten to silence me for describing how that right is denied, you become part of the very problem I came here to expose. Gasps swept through the hall. The Chief Justice, known for composure, flushed red. For the first time, he had no immediate reply. Seconds stretched painfully. Then Justice Kagan's calm voice broke the silence. Perhaps we should allow the Congresswoman to finish her thought. It was quiet rebellion, a justice shielding a representative from the gavel of her own chief. Roberts hesitated, then nodded stiffly. Briefly conclude. Crockett straightened, her voice deepening with conviction. This Texas law demands forms of identification that 23% of Black Texans and 27% of Latino Texans lack, compared with 4.7% of white Texans. It closes ID offices in minority neighborhoods while keeping them open in others. If that's not discrimination, what is? The 15th Amendment is plain. The right to vote shall not be denied or abridged on account of race. She raised the document higher. If this court cannot see that, then it is not interpreting the Constitution, it is rewriting it. Roberts struck his gavel again. Your time has expired. But she stood her ground. Mr. Chief Justice, she said, calm but immovable, the Constitution does not grant you the authority to silence an elected representative discussing the 15th Amendment. The words rang like a bell through the chamber. For several heartbeats, no one moved. Then from the back, a single pair of hands began to clap. Another joined. Within seconds, the entire gallery rose in applause, an unthinkable breach of Supreme Court protocol. Cameras flashed as Roberts called for order, but history had already recorded the moment. Jasmine Crockett standing firm, Constitution in hand, while the nation's highest courtroom trembled. Outside, the steps of the Supreme Court erupted into chaos. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward. Congresswoman, what happened in there? Crockett, face calm but eyes shining, replied, I reminded the court that the Constitution belongs to the people, not just to 9 justices. Her phone buzzed endlessly, texts from colleagues, calls from journalists, notifications stacking faster than she could read. Within an hour, the hashtag Crockett Constitution was trending across the country. Clips of her confrontation aired on every network. CNN's headline blazed, Crockett confronts Roberts, the Constitution belongs to the people. MSNBC replayed her line again and again, while Fox News criticized her for disrupting decorum. Yet even critics admitted she had been prepared, citing facts, precedent, and the founding document itself. By evening, the confrontation dominated every platform. Civil rights leaders praised her courage. Law professors debated separation of powers live on television. Harvard's Lawrence Tribe called her a modern echo of Barbara Jordan wielding constitutional text like a sword. At the White House press briefing, reporters demanded comment. The press secretary answered carefully, the president believes in judicial independence, but also in the sacred right to vote. Congresswoman Crockett raised substantive constitutional concerns that merit reflection. Across social media, Americans of every background shared the clip of the 84-year-old Mary Wilson, now interviewed on morning shows, her voice trembling with pride. I never missed an election until they turned me away. When I heard my name spoken in that courtroom, I felt seen. Her face became the human emblem of the legal storm. Within days, public opinion shifted. Polls showed 64% of Americans believed Crockett had been right to challenge the Chief Justice. Editorial boards called the moment a mirror for America's conscience. Late-night hosts replayed it. Protesters gathered outside state houses holding candles and pocket constitutions, reading aloud the 15th Amendment. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged on account of race. News anchors described it as the first time in decades that ordinary citizens were quoting constitutional text at rallies. 3 weeks later came the court's decision. Williams v. Texas Election Commission was struck down 5-4. Roberts himself authored the opinion, joined by Kagan, Sotomayor, Jackson, and, unexpectedly, Barrett. Without naming Crockett, the opinion echoed her words, citing the plight of Mary Wilson as proof that bureaucratic barriers had become unconstitutional burdens. Barrett's concurrence declared, "When voting regulations bar hundreds of thousands from casting ballots, courts must apply the most rigorous scrutiny. The right to vote is the heartbeat of the Republic." Legal scholars immediately labeled the shift the Crockett effect. In the weeks that followed, textbooks, podcasts, and documentaries dissected the event. Law schools taught her argument as a model of constitutional advocacy. Civil rights groups rallied behind new federal legislation, inspired by her testimony. At the American Constitution Society's annual convention, Crockett stood before thousands of lawyers and judges. "The Constitution," she said, "was never meant to belong to institutions. It belongs to the people." "We the people" means all the people. Her voice filled the hall. When she finished, the entire crowd stood in applause. 3 years later, when President Harris nominated her as U.S. Solicitor General, senators inevitably asked if she regretted that fiery day. She smiled faintly. "I don't regret standing up for the Constitution or for those who trusted me with their voice." The committee confirmed her with bipartisan support. When she returned to the Supreme Court for the first time in her new role, Chief Justice Roberts greeted her with a measured nod. "The court recognizes Solicitor General Crockett," he said. "An advocate this court remembers well." The gallery sensed the unspoken respect. Back in Dallas, Mary Wilson, now 87, walked slowly into her polling place, her new ID card shining under fluorescent lights. When she cast her ballot, she whispered to the poll worker, "Tell Congresswoman Crockett thank you." A photographer captured that smile, the quiet fulfillment of a promise born in a marble chamber years before. That photograph appeared on front pages nationwide, beneath the headline, "We the People" means all the people. And somewhere in Washington, Jasmine Crockett looked at that image and allowed herself a rare tear. It had never been about headlines or power. It had always been about the country's oldest document and its youngest promises. So when viewers across America watched the viral clip again, the red suit under white marble, the Constitution held high, they weren't just seeing a confrontation. They were witnessing democracy, reminding itself who it belongs to. And if you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more powerful political stories, and share it with someone who believes that courage still matters in our republic, because the Constitution lives not in courts or congresses, but in the hearts of people willing to stand up and speak when silence would be easier.